Are your savings and your pension really safe? Every year, a part of your future is silently eaten away, not by a sudden crisis, but by a ticking time bomb set off decades ago. In this video, we will reveal the 10 European nations where this threat is most severe, using a single brutal indicator: the ratio between public debt and GDP. But be careful, this is not an abstract number for economists. It is the very expensive bill of a party that lasted far too long, a bill that today is presented directly to us in the form of higher taxes and fewer rights. We will show you why, even though we keep paying more and more, the roads are full of potholes, healthcare is in crisis, and retirement seems like an ever more distant goal. And in the end, we will compare this European picture with the situation in the United States. Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 10. Austria. How much did the failure of a single bank you may never have heard of cost you personally? If you live in Austria, the answer is almost €1,500 per person, from newborns to pensioners. And this is only the first page of a very uncomfortable story. Our journey begins in a country that, on paper, seems like a happy island, since it is below the psychological threshold of 100% debt. But this is an optical illusion. Before 2008, Vienna was a model, with debt stable at around 65% of GDP. Then three devastating waves changed the rules of the game. The first was the disastrous bailout of Hypo Alpi Adria Bank, a black hole of more than €13 billion. The second was the pandemic, with more than 50 billion in extra spending. Finally, the energy crisis, which required more costly aid. Today, the result of these crises is a total debt approaching €400 billion. But the figure that should really make you think is another one: €9 billion. This is the amount Austria burns every year just to pay interest. Money taken from your taxes that, instead of funding your pension or improving healthcare, disappears to cover past mistakes. That is why, when you hear the official figure, 82.9% of debt to GDP, it is not good news. It is the snapshot of a lost stability, and the bill for it, year after year, is presented directly to Austrians. Number 9. Finland. An F-35 fighter jet or a new nurse in a hospital? A missile to defend the borders, or a subsidy to help you pay rent? For decades, this was a choice that Finland, the ultimate Nordic model, never thought it would have to make. Today, it is the brutal reality of everyday life. To understand Finland's drama, one number is enough. In 2008, its debt was an enviable 32.7% of GDP. Then came a slow hemorrhage: the collapse of the Nokia giant, the crisis of the timber and paper market, a rapidly aging population, and the costs of a generous welfare system. Finally, the knockout blows: the pandemic and, above all, the Putin factor. Fear of Russia pushed Helsinki into a desperate rearmament race, with billions in military spending that had not been planned. The result is a debt that has almost tripled, now exceeding €240 billion. And the new government has handed the bill directly to its citizens with an unprecedented package of cuts: less housing support, reduced unemployment benefits, and higher healthcare costs. All these austerity measures, unthinkable just a few years ago in the happiest country in the world, are the direct consequence of a number that marks the end of an era: public debt skyrocketing to 86.4% of GDP. Number 8. Portugal. Imagine being placed under guardianship. Imagine 3 foreign bankers knocking on your door and taking full control of your finances, deciding how much money you can spend, which medical treatments you can afford, and forcing you to sell the family jewels. This is not the plot of a movie. It is what Portugal endured when it was bailed out by the Troika. We have already spoken about the severe crisis of Portugal and other Eurozone nations in another video, which we recommend you watch to better understand its causes. But as for the consequences, just consider this. For 12 years, from 2010 to 2022, the country lived with a noose around its neck, with public debt constantly above 100% of GDP and terrifying peaks above 130%. To secure €78 billion and avoid bankruptcy, Lisbon was forced into a brutal treatment. Public salaries and pensions slashed with an axe. VAT raised to 23% on essential goods. The sell-off of strategic assets such as the airline tap, and an entire generation of young people, almost 500,000, forced to pack their bags and emigrate. Certainly, since 2023, thanks in part to a tourism boom and runaway inflation that inflated GDP, the number has finally gone down. But today's figure, 91.8% of GDP, does not tell the story of a victory. It tells the story of a painful convalescence. Portugal teaches us a brutal lesson. Escaping the red zone of debt comes with an extremely high human cost, and the wounds, even when the numbers improve, remain visible for decades. Number 7. Spain. Airports without planes, ghost towns rotting under the sun. This is the most powerful symbol of the madness that swept through Spain, and the very expensive bill was presented directly to Spaniards. It seems impossible, but in 2007, Spain was a model. With public debt at just 36% of GDP, it was even more virtuous than Germany and France. The country was experiencing an economic boom, though one fueled by a gigantic housing bubble. When that bubble burst, it revealed the original sin. The banks were full of toxic debts. In 2012, the government asked Europe for 42 billion euros. But those 42 billion did not end up in the pockets of pensioners or the unemployed. They were used to plug the black holes of the banks. And the cruelest irony is that, to repay that bailout, the government then imposed brutal cuts on the very salaries and pensions it claimed to protect. Losses were socialised for the bankers, while sacrifices were privatised for the citizens. And the price was high. Savage cuts to healthcare and education, a VAT hike that made everything more expensive, and unemployment that reached 26%, leaving an entire generation without a future. For those over 45, losing a job became a nightmare with no way out. And today, the bill for that party you were never invited to has arrived. Debt has smashed through the 100% mark, standing at 100.6% of GDP. In absolute numbers, it is a monster of nearly 1.6 trillion euros. Number 6. United Kingdom. The pride of a nation, its National Health Service, is on its knees, with millions of people stuck on endless waiting lists. To understand why, we must go back to when the United Kingdom seemed like a safe haven. In 2007, its public debt was an enviable 38% of GDP. Then everything changed in 2008. As the epicenter of the global financial earthquake, London was forced to nationalise its banking giants, such as RBS, opening a black hole in public finances that cost more than £1 trillion in guarantees and loans. That was the beginning of a long and painful accumulation of debt. To this, two epical events were added. First, Brexit. Leaving the European single market reintroduced controls and costs in trade with its main partner, a factor that inevitably slowed the pace of the country's economic growth. Then came the final blow, the pandemic. The hugely expensive furlough scheme, the British wage support programme, caused spending to skyrocket, and, for the first time in recent history, debt exceeded the wealth produced in a single year. That was in 2020. Today, the most bitter consequence is the cost of interest. When you hear politicians say that there is no magic money tree to fix the NHS, it is because the government burns through a record £100 billion every year just to pay interest. The final result is a number that captures the crisis of an entire nation, 103.9% of GDP. Number 5. Belgium. If you have ever driven on Belgian roads, you will have noticed two things: the streetlights that are permanently on and the potholes, countless potholes. The change in asphalt quality when entering Belgium from the Netherlands or Germany is almost proverbial. It is the subject of endless jokes and complaints from commuters and international truck drivers. But the real shock comes when you discover that Belgian citizens pay the highest taxes on labour in the developed world. How is such a paradox possible? The story of Belgium's debt is not that of a sudden collapse, but of a chronic disease. Already in the early 1990s, it exceeded 130% of GDP. and since then it has never been cured. The cause is not a financial crisis, but the political paralysis of a country with 6 governments for just 11 million inhabitants. It is a body with 6 brains giving conflicting orders, and the result is extremely costly immobility. And who pays for this inefficiency? The citizens. Belgium has the highest tax wedge in the entire OECD. This means that the difference between what your employer pays for your salary and what you actually take home is the largest in the world. In practice, your earnings are eaten up to keep alive a bloated state machine, and in return, you often get inefficient services and crumbling roads. This is not a temporary crisis. It is a system that has been running for 30 years on a frightening number. Public debt at 106.4% of GDP. Number 4. Ukraine. Now we come to a country whose debt does not tell a story of financial crises or waste, but of a brutal struggle for national survival. For Ukraine, going into debt was not a choice, but the only option to continue existing. Its financial history has a before and an after. The before was a country with controlled debt at 40% of GDP. The after begins in 2014. That year, according to International Monetary Fund data, was the turning point when the crisis of 2014, triggered by the annexation of Crimea and the start of the war in Donbass, pushed debt above 70% in just a few months. From there, with the exception of 2021, it was a constant deterioration. Then, with the full-scale war that began in 2022, came total collapse. GDP fell by 30%, not because of a recession, but because factories were bombed, ports were blocked, and farmland was mined. To avoid bankruptcy, Kyiv had to borrow massively, not from speculators, but from its allies: the European Union, the United States, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. For ordinary people, the impact was devastating. Inflation above 26% wiped out a lifetime of savings. And the future has been mortgaged twice. Not only will future generations have to repay this survival debt, but they will also have to find nearly $500 billion estimated just for reconstruction. The result today is debt soaring to nearly 110% of GDP, born from a tragic and absolute necessity. Number 3. France. For almost half a century, every French government has followed an unwritten rule: finance expensive promises today and let the next generation pay the bill. It all begins in the 1980s, when François Mitterrand inaugurated the era of big spending, lowering the retirement age and expanding the public sector. Later, Jacques Chirac presided over a period where social peace was prioritised over budget discipline, allowing debt to grow slowly but inexorably. Then came Nicolas Sarkozy. He tried to reverse course by imposing the first painful pension reform, raising the minimum age from 60 to 62. But, partly because of the 2008 financial crisis, debt still exploded, reaching 90%. Elected on the promise of doing the exact opposite, François Hollande first massively raised taxes, then reduced the tax burden on businesses in an attempt to stimulate growth. Yet, this did not prevent debt from climbing to 98% of GDP. Finally, Emmanuel Macron delivered the final blow. Faced with the pandemic, his promise to spend whatever it takes to save the economy pushed debt up by another 240 billion euros. Today, that bill has arrived. It shows up in record tax pressure and protests against having to work longer, as citizens are told they must pay for the choices of the past. The result is the highest debt in Europe in absolute terms, more than 3 trillion euros, equal to 116.3% of GDP. Number 2, Italy. Imagine an athlete of manufacturing and creativity, famous worldwide, but forced to run with a backpack full of stones on his shoulders. That athlete is Italy, and the backpack is its public debt. In the 1980s, the divorce between the government and the Bank of Italy eliminated the obligation for the central bank to print money to finance government spending, closing the state's unlimited ATM. The goal was to make governments more responsible, but the opposite happened. Continuing the free spending habits, easy public hiring, generous pensions, widespread subsidies to buy consensus. politicians had to offer very high interest rates to savers, triggering an unstoppable debt spiral. From that moment on, Italian debt has remained above 100% of GDP since the early 1990s. The real cancer, however, has been growth stuck at zero for 25 years, blocked by suffocating bureaucracy and a painfully slow justice system. True, in 2023, Italy surprised with growth of 0.9%, even surpassing Germany, and future prospects also look encouraging. But this does not erase recent waste, such as the Superbonus 110%, a law that, through a system of transferable tax credits, promised citizens a free home renovation, with the state covering 110% of expenses. A party that cost more than 120 billion euros. And who pays the bill? Italians, with very high taxes needed to burn through 80 billion euros a year just in interest payments, and with an unstable pension system that creates only uncertainty. The final result is a monster of nearly 2.9 trillion euros, equal to 137.3% of GDP. Before revealing number one and showing the comparison with the United States, if you found this video informative, we kindly ask you to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell so you don't miss our new videos. We truly thank you for the support you give to our project. Number 1. Greece. Imagine waking up and finding the banks closed. When they reopen, you can withdraw only 60 euros a day, not a cent more. Imagine the panic, the lines, the humiliation of not being able to access your own money. This is not a movie. It is what Greeks lived through in 2015. The Greek tragedy was born from an original sin. To enter the euro, Athens deliberately manipulated its accounts for years, hiding the abyss of an economy based on endemic tax evasion and a gigantic, unproductive public sector. When the truth emerged in 2009, the markets shut the taps and Greece plunged toward the abyss. To avoid collapse, the country was placed under external control by the Troika, the informal body made up of the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. In exchange for hundreds of billions in loans, an unprecedented social massacre was imposed. Pensions and salaries were cut by up to 40%. Youth unemployment reached 60%, and strategic assets such as the port of Piraeus were sold off. Paradoxically, this devastating cure made the debt-to-GDP ratio explode, reaching the insane figure of 209.9% in 2020. Today, after a decade-long economic depression, the number has gone down, but the scars of that catastrophe remain, engraved in a figure that still secures Greece the first place in Europe, 142.2% of GDP. But how is the world's superpower doing? Not well at all, but some important clarifications are needed. US debt is truly enormous, yet the country seems, at least on the surface, to never really pay the consequences. How is this possible? The answer lies in a superpower known as exorbitant privilege. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. It is as if they were the owners of the casino, able to print the chips that everyone else is forced to play with. But even this superpower has limits. Before the 2008 crisis, US debt was under control. Then everything changed. In 2009, for the first time, it surpassed 80% of GDP. In 2012, it broke through the psychological wall of 100%. The real boom came with the 2020 pandemic. To save the economy, Washington injected trillions into the system, and debt reached its record peak of 132%. Since then, the ratio has slightly decreased, not because debt has gone down, but because the economy has grown faster. Yet the bill for citizens has still arrived. Inflation has eroded savings, and rising interest rates have sent mortgage payments skyrocketing. With nearly $1 trillion a year burned just on interest, US debt today is a monster of $34 trillion, equal to 122.5% of GDP. You can see the complete ranking with all European countries, the United States and Canada, on our new channel America vs. Europe, where we made a video dedicated to this very topic. And since we have just talked about inflation, we also recommend watching this video where we ranked all European Union countries based on how much supermarket costs have increased over the past 10 years. That's all for this video. See you next time.